40% of audiences fall into this bucket that you guys are overseeing. We have a ton of fragmentation. We have AI. We have so much going on as an industry. So to get started, what is the silver lining? What are the opportunities that you're most excited about in your roles today?
I'll jump on this first. I think from a cross-cultural perspective, it's super exciting. And I'm super optimistic of the future. When you think about the audiences that are driving growth in the US, it's Gen Z. When you think about Gen Z, 1 out of 2 is multicultural, right? So it's just innate that they are tech first. And you think about the CTV space, I have 3 kids. They've never watched broadcast TV. It's all streaming, right? So I think the CTV space is exciting. I think when you think about the shoppable space and streaming, that's exciting. So that I think there's a lot of advancements that are happening very fast, very quick. It makes, I think, my job and Steven's job a bit complicated, but I think there's just a lot of pluses for us when you think about it through the lens of these consumers.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think it's, like I said earlier, it's an exciting time because we, looking ahead, I think we're not limited anymore by a 24-hour, programming wheel. We've got the ability to use technology to, target and attract audiences and engage audiences like we've never done before. Only thing holding us back is really time and engaging internally with all the stakeholders and making sure that we've got everything in place. I think it's also exciting from a programming standpoint in terms of how you can kind of go into niche areas of all the different profiles that are out there. CTV, fast, I think, whether it's a vertically programmed opportunity or it's a VOD opportunity, we're seeing that from an attractive standpoint as far as brand partnerships and programmatic opportunities where we're not limited anymore, right? And those are I see some people in the room that have been around this space for a while. We had those limitations, right? So it's nice to see that not only is it a cultural opportunity to connect with more audiences and a more diverse, set of samples, but also I think tech has provided us with that platform and that opportunity to do that.
Yeah, I think if you think about it, CTV is one of the greatest media cultural equalizers that we've seen, and at least since I've been in. Yeah, so let me get into that, right? Well, since already Sebastian alluded to the fact that we've been decades in the industry. So, over the time that we've been here, I do believe.
Started very young.
I know.
They're decades.
Yeah. So what I mean by that, I think it eliminates a lot of the past barriers. One being specifically measurement. We've been always dependent on third-party measurement. And when you talked about broadcast and linear TV, especially from a multicultural marketplace, it was extremely volatile when we were looking and depending on a measurement system or a currency that wasn't necessary. It was essentially the only form of measurement, right? That no longer from a digital perspective is that, can you hold a third party accountable? That is dependent on the publisher, right? Also from a cultural perspective, as we understand that not only diverse audiences are leading consumption when it comes to digital, the younger audiences are more diverse, meaning that also has created content across the board that has to be more relevant when you think about cultural. We actually at Publicis, we subscribe to Nielsen Grace Note, and it's one of the interesting tools that we have, and this is why my role from an inclusive perspective is important, because we need to look at it overall, right? And we see that it measures the platforms, and the platform with the most inclusivity, right, in terms of cast, production, time spent, and time actually on screen that is most diverse is streaming. So that's really what I mean by like a cultural equalizer from a basic data and measurement perspective to also the content that's being led with a diverse lens.
Super interesting. So you guys hit on a couple different themes here. You talked about measurement being something that you're really thinking a lot about, but what about segmentation? It feels like the first step is finding your multicultural audience. I think as a technologist and somebody who thinks a lot about go-to-market, the first thing I always think about is what is the easy button? What are the things that we can do as technologists, as sell-side providers to make it easy for you guys to buy from us, to reach your audiences? So what are those things if you're talking to a publisher or a technologist, what are the things that we can do to make it easy for you guys to reach your audiences, measure them, achieve your goals for your clients?
I think from my perspective is ensuring that there's accurate data behind it and there's not inherent bias in the data that you're utilizing.
And just to build on that, so at OMG, I oversee strategy and investment. And I think it's important for publishers to think of us not from a transactional perspective, but how do we upstream all of the data and insights that you have at your finger, you know, tips, thank you, to really change the narrative, right? In terms of how we plan, how we create audiences. I think that's an opportunity for us to unlock more investment in the space, because I see so many publishers come to us and they talk to us more from a tactical perspective versus a bigger picture perspective, right? Ideation, innovation, that really drives, you know, clients to lean in and say, hey, there's something bigger that we can do here outside of just streaming. Maybe there's activation, maybe there's a shopper component, maybe there's something else. I think the data really is gonna drive the decision making. And I think there's a lot of partners that don't know what data that they're sitting on. I think the more, like to Steven's point, that they dig deeper into it, I think the more opportunity there is to unlock, you know, greater investment.
What's an example of a data nugget that a partner might be sitting on that they might not know is valuable to you?
So so there's a partner that we were just talking to a couple of weeks ago that has a big footprint in key DMAs, but the conversation that we have is more from a national perspective, right? And with privacy laws creating more barriers in terms of reaching and engaging these cross-cultural segments, I said, hey, you're sitting in an opportunity to really engage these communities, because if you think about Miami, Houston, San Francisco, LA, obviously you're looking at the news of what's happening across all these big cities this week, right? These populations, these communities are driving growth, not just from numbers, but like the business growth, right? So I'm like, is there an opportunity to build your audience data graph from these communities and kind of start backwards instead of thinking about just nationally? And I think there's an opportunity to really drive business from a local perspective. And I think the conversation that we continue to hear is nationally, scale. Yes, that's what our clients want. But then we try to flip the script too, in terms of what can we do from a regional perspective? What could we do from a local DMA perspective? And I think that really could provide a case study on how some publishers could really help clients move product and services.
That is so cool, because I didn't pay you to say that. But Madhive's bread and butter has always been local. And it's so interesting. Our clients are linear broadcasters, and they think so much about how local communities fit into these campaigns. But in terms of changing cultural landscapes, you reference what's going on with the in communities around the U.S. this week. What about how that's fitting into your planning and your PMPs? Like, for example, if there is a household where there might be Spanish-speaking parents, but there might be kids that are consuming content in English, how are you guys bridging that gap? How are you guys thinking about media buying for situations like that?
So I'll just jump in real quick. I think there's an interesting duality that's always existed, particularly on the USH market space in the US, where the three of us are bilingual families. The nice thing about FreeTV is that we're also an English language platform and a Spanish language platform that's leaning more niche every day because of what the things Mike said, right? You look at what the fabric of our country and the way it's set up. I think we need to address that, and not only the way we curate and create collections for our programming, but to your point, I think there is a duality in terms of like different generations. There's always been, going back to when linear was what we consider linear and at its strength, or its core, when it was broadcast and it was driving all these people to these great opportunities, there was like this general programming kind of approach to an evening, right? You didn't have the way we can program now. And ideally, in a perfect world, we're going to start getting more first party data from who's actually the user, right? And I think we were all happy in this room about 3-4 years ago when we started seeing the scale we could create by just having an open, non-authenticated platform. But now we're talking to partners. There's an interesting opportunity for us to now dig in a little deeper. And there might be a programming set or things that we would consider for different parts of the household that in the past we were completely limited. So it's on us as publishers to take a look at that, use technology. The last thing I'll say is that I think, I know AI will probably come up in every conversation this week, but
Still my next question.
So I won't steal your thunder, but it's clearly on us to look at those technologies and those software opportunities to revisit our content IDs and how we're looking at, acquiring content. We get content from over 60 countries around the world, 10,000 hours. So how do we dig into that and then super serve each of those individuals in those households? Because it's not going to be one size fits all.
Yeah, I think the mistake that happens is that people think you have to pick one. it's about the storytelling, right? That is the cultural storytelling is what's really going to drive that engagement with the consumer. So it's not about English and Spanish. Like English and Spanish at the end of the day is the tactic. English at the core, it's culture and the storytelling of the culture that is going to drive engagement with Hispanic specifically, but across the different diverse segments in terms of that cultural. It's critical from a cultural perspective.
And I'll just add real quick, if you follow me anywhere, I always add that hashtag cultural wink, because that's how I think we looked at it. Was like it's a nod, right? It's I see you, and it may not necessarily be in your language, but I recognize you. And that's the toughest challenge, I think, in general, publishers. And yeah.
I always think about good marketing holds up a mirror to the customer and helps them to see themselves in what you're talking to them about. Were you going to say something?
Yeah, actually, this kind of answers both of your last questions. I think one of the other things too that publishers are sitting on is the fact that we still don't have full transparency from streamers and from CTV in terms of what viewers are watching, right? So it would be very interesting in terms of what, for example, Hispanics are watching, you know, in terms of the generational divide. You know, you were just hinting at parents speaking Spanish, kids speaking English, but maybe that's not the hypothesis, right? Maybe you see it, right, in terms of kids still, you know, retaining their culture more than ever before, right? They're bilingual, there's retroculturation. I would love more data points on what they are seeing on the libraries, on the big streamers, on CTV, and that could help us inform smarter strategies on how to reach and engage them. Because I think we try to build a narrative in terms of what they're watching, but the more data that we can tap into, especially from some of the bigger streamers as well, it could help us really kind of create smarter, more, you know, stickier campaigns.
I love that. So obviously the theme of the week here, it feels like, is AI. I would love to hear a little bit about how do you think AI is transforming your work today, and where do you think it will take you in the future?
Look, you know, we've been talking about AI now for the last,
Forever.
3 years. I think, you know, we could do a drinking game every time we hear the word AI, but look, we're embracing it. I think we all have to embrace it. I think it's already part of many of our products and services. And, you know, I don't want to speak for Steven, but I know for Omnicom Media Group, you know, we have our Omni Planning platform, which has over 250 million unique IDs. So we could build audiences from there. We also have Omni Assist, which is an AI chatbot that helps our planners kind of create these audiences, and it helps limit biases in terms of creating these audiences. So I think it's there. It's up to us in terms of how we use it and how, you know, in the future, how we're gonna make this pretty much part of our toolkit. I think, you know, a lot of folks try to put more fear in terms of what AI is gonna do. I think it's gonna unlock more opportunities. I think it's just the onus is on us to ensure that we kind of create that as part of our skill set.
I love that.
Yeah, my very short answer is I think it's going to help us optimize how we program, not only to our customers and engage with them, but also understanding, you know, the ability now to dub and localize content, which has always been, if you're in the content space, it's one of the most expensive parts of acquiring content is dubbing and localizing it. So I think these tools are helping us bring more content to our platform. So from that standpoint, selfishly, it's going to help. I think it's also going to help us like individually, contextually find maybe areas to super serve those needs. I mean, other than just looking at the metric of how many people are watching or engaged is not enough. We need to go deeper than that.
Totally. Well, and you talked about how much time, like just the sheer scale of content that we have now. And you talked about how important it is to contextualize for your communities that content. And that to me sounds like a job for AI, right?
I think there's a couple of things. One, AI at the core of Publicis was probably one of the most controversial topics because that's when we pulled out of Cannes one year. If you guys recall, Publicis pulled out to focus on the productization of Marcel and our data partner in Epsilon, right? So that at the core of everything that we do, we believe that AI is going to be a huge function in our day-to-day roles. But at the same time, to your point, it's exactly that. You need to ensure that you have that humanization behind it to ensure that there's not those biases that are naturally within, and then also the processing of that data to create real cultural relevance.
Well, thank you guys so much.
you.
This was great.